Another day, another real world test. Today, we're doing it on the iPhone 15 Plus, the big boy. And as per the usual, we'll explore while we test out this phone. But first things first. Coffee. Check. This is Baked Brooklyn, a bakery/coffee shop that is a part of Aladdin Bakers. If you live in the New York area, you may recognize the logo and the name from their pita chips that you usually find in grocery stores here. Now, Baked in Brooklyn is a snack division of Aladdin Bakers, which was started by a man named Joseph Ayoub in 1972, and is a 17-year-old making pitas by hand and delivering them locally throughout his neighborhood. Now, he is known in the baking industry for doing his best to automate production of products for distribution across the country while trying to keep the artisanal aspect as best as possible. Now, the store here is attached to a 100,000 square foot bakery that takes up half a city block. And you can see a lot of what they're doing from inside the cafe. It's just impressive, really. Okay, so firstly, it's interesting for me to remind myself that this is only the second Plus model iPhone, after Apple swapped the Mini for the Plus with the launch of the iPhone 14 Plus. Sad day for everyone who wants smaller phones, but on the Plus side, it's a good day at least for anyone who loved the size of the iPhone Pro Max series but didn't need all the bells and whistles the Pro series comes with, and that price difference, of course. Now, the iPhone 15 Plus and the iPhone 15 are the same size as the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the iPhone 15 Pro, respectively. The Plus having the same 6.7-inch size screen as the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the 15 having the same 6.1-inch screen as the 15 Pro. Those screens, now on both non-Pro models, have a 2000 nit brightness in direct sunlight compared to the 1600 nits of the iPhone 14 Plus of last year. And honestly, it looks great. We also now have a more curved edge on the rail around the phone, which just gives it a less sharp feeling in the hand. We also have the dynamic island cutout that last year was reserved for the iPhone Pro models, and as I've said about those devices in the past, I like it. It's a great way to utilize the cutout and make it feel like it's part of the software experience and alive. As with everything that requires developers to add some code to their app in order to take advantage of this dynamic island, for example, it's going a bit slow, and so there's not a lot of apps outside of Apple's own that use this yet. Besides those apps though, like the timer, which I use a lot, I've enjoyed the Lyft time to pick up and drop off live activities up there, and using it for Spotify too. Now, besides the display, the back of the phone has received a new method of infusing the color into the glass, and even more interesting is what it's done to the texture. It feels kind of soft, and the matte coloring is also a nice touch. One of the bigger stories around the new iPhone 15 series, we now have USB-C. There's no more lightning cable. Long story short, Apple lost a battle with the European Union and will be required soon to adopt USB-C in Europe anyway, so they basically just decided to get a head start with it and do it now. Regardless, USB-C is going to help the industry as a whole, as it's what most electronics use nowadays, including your MacBook and your iPad. The downside is that USB as a standard is very confusing. I have a decoder episode here on the channel explaining Thunderbolt 4, and I go into USB in that. If you're curious, I'll link that below. But suffice it to say, in this video, the USB version Apple is using on the iPhone 15 and the 15 Plus is a lesser version than the iPhone 15 Pro and iPhone 15 Pro Max. All that means to you, though, is that the max speed of transferring things via USB on this iPhone 15 Plus is 480 megabits per second versus the 10 gigabits per second on the Pro models. Truth is, though, most people using an iPhone will simply airdrop things to their Mac if they have one, and unless you're shooting large footage files and need to transfer them regularly to the computer, you probably won't notice or care about the speed when transferring files plugged in. Now, something else that the Pro models get that these non-Pro models don't is the action button, which is a customizable button that you can set to do any action. You can check out either my iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max video linked below for more on that. So instead, here we have the usual notification slider for silent and ring, which, if you're like me, you'll set to vibrate as soon as you set up the phone and you'll never touch it again. This is the Greenwood Cemetery, which is also a National Historic Landmark. It was founded in 1838 as one of America's first rural cemeteries. It's now urban thanks to the expansion of New York City, but it spans across 478 acres. Now, in the early 1860s, this place had become famous worldwide for its stunning beauty and had turned into the go-to spot for people to be laid to rest. It drew in around 500,000 visitors every year, even back then, making it the second most popular tourist destination in the country behind Niagara Falls. The cemetery now has over 570,000 permanent residents, and a lot of famous ones, including Leonard Bernstein, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and even Civil War generals, baseball legends, politicians, artists, entertainers, and inventors. It's also a Revolutionary War historic site because of the Battle of Long Island, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, which was the first major battle after America declared independence from the British in 1776. Now, American forces were defeated here on what became known as Battle Hill, which happens to also be the highest natural point in Brooklyn. But it's still positively remembered for General George Washington's secretive late-night evacuation of his forces to Manhattan, which, if that didn't happen, it could have ended the war right then and there. There's even now a monument that went up in 1920 of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and war, gesturing or saluting, or maybe just kind of waving toward the direction of the Statue of Liberty off in the distance. Okay, and this seems like a good place to talk about the iPhone 15 Plus cameras. Firstly, we have the same ultra-wide camera that we had from last year, which is a 12-megapixel f2.4 aperture camera, and I'll let you guys decide about the difference between it and last year's throughout this video, along with all the other images and videos as usual. Now, the bigger change here, though, is the new main sensor, which is now a 48-megapixel f1.6 aperture 1 by 1.56 inch sensor with 1 micron size pixels that get binned in sets of 4 to get a 12 megapixel image with 2 micron size pixels, kind of like how the Pro models have done for a bit now, as well as most other phones. Now, that larger pixel size allows for more light per pixel, which helps with low light shots. Something clever, though, that Apple has added is that during the capture of these images, they actually grab another 48 megapixel frame and combine the detail from that to the 12 megapixel larger pixel image to get a 24 megapixel image as the end result. Sort of an interesting way of getting the low light benefits from the larger pixels plus some extra resolution. And it works well, honestly. And you can, of course, always set it back to 12 megapixels in the options if you don't want it. Now, the only reason for that would be to save storage, as the 24 megapixel images add about 37% more size to the files in JPEG. Now, the other benefit that we get out of the higher megapixel sensor here is the fact that they can do the same thing they've done on the Pro models, and other devices do as well, and get a decent 2x crop by taking out the middle 12 megapixels from the 48 megapixels. It's similar to putting an APS-C lens on a full-frame camera to get a cropped focal length of sorts for those used to the mirrorless camera world. The downside to this, though, is that you can't bin the pixels, so we lose a decent amount of low-light performance. But it does at least help make the non-Pro models feel like they have a third lens, and in good lighting, the photos are solid enough. But of course, it isn't the same as the 3x actual lens on the Pro or the 5x actual lens on the Pro Max. Apple also added in some new software features for the camera, and the one that I kind of think that most people are going to use with this phone is the new portrait mode features. And there are two main advantages to that. Firstly, it auto-detects a person, dog, or cat, and even if you don't select portrait mode, it'll grab the depth data automatically, and you'll see an F symbol, the symbol for aperture, which is responsible for the bokeh or the blur behind a subject in a bigger way. This means that you can go in to edit this normal photo and turn it into a portrait mode shot after the fact. You can also adjust the level of blur, but you can also even tap elsewhere to change the subject that's blurred. Now, if that last part sounds familiar, the HTC One M8 had that feature back in 2014. It does, thankfully, work a lot better here than it did there, though. Now, I've learned since my iPhone 15 Pro real-world test, you can actually force it to capture this depth data on non-human dog-cat subjects if you tap on the subject and there's enough distance between it and the foreground. Now, the next portrait mode benefit we have is the ability to do night portrait shots, which we just couldn't before, so that's great. Lastly, Apple has updated the HDR for photos so that it should look more natural, apparently, but again, I'll let you guys be the judges of that throughout this video. Welcome to the Sea Witch Tavern, and it's a bar just down the street from the cemetery. It's a very local feeling, dive-ish vibe kind of place, complete with an array of ocean-themed items on the walls, and even this large undersea mural covering one side of the place, almost entirely. Then, there's my favorite decoration in here, the giant, mesmerizing fish tank set right behind the bar. Now, if you don't want to just look at the fish, though, there are plenty of seafood items on the surprisingly good bar food menu. It's just a good vibe to come in here from the cold and have a hot meal and a cold beer. All right, so one of the big reasons to get the iPhone 15 Plus over the other iPhones in this year's lineup is if you want the best battery life possible, and I can confirm it's pretty great. Here's my screen on time, my usage for today on the iPhone 15 Plus, but keep in mind, as usual, I took a lot more photos than you ever would, so it's not the best comparison, and because of that, here's another more normal day, so that you at least have something to compare it to as well. Now, besides that, the other reasons for grabbing the 15 Plus over the others is if you want a huge screen, but you don't want to pay for the top model iPhone 15 Pro Max, and you don't care about the extra features that provides. The iPhone 15 Plus starts at $899 compared to the $300 more expensive $1199 of the Pro Max. Now, although the Pro Max starts now at 256 gigs versus the 128 gig storage size of the Plus, so really you need to select the 256 gigs if you want to compare apples to apples, and then you're looking at a $200 difference. Now, you can also go for the 14 Plus, because that's still on sale, to save another $100. But personally, I think the 15 Plus has enough new things this year, at least, to justify that extra $100. But I'm curious if you guys think it's a better buy than the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Let me know in the comments below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys. And I think with that, I am calling it a night. Thanks for coming along. Subscribe and ding the bell if you want to see more real-world tests and explore a bit more with me. Otherwise, good night. And a plane. I can hear a plane. Yep, there he is. Plane in a cemetery. I'm not gonna lie, it does kind of break the vibe. Is nothing sacred? First, bird, I'm gonna need you to stop. Please, just for a second. And then a plane. Feathered birds and birds of metal. Causing me distress. And the plane. Jesus Christ. Siren. Motorcycle. Can't win. Is a good jet happening? What's happening?